EpicDev podcast, tech products that work.
Welcome to the EpicDev podcast. Here at EpicDev, we build and maintain tech products that work. And in these discussions, we chat about pretty much anything and everything in our industry, just to share some of our experience and insights. Okay, so let me give you an example of what I think of when I think cutting edge user experience. The ironic thing about this is that it's been around for quite a while, but I'm starting to see it being implemented in ways that is extremely beneficial to systems. Okay, let me just start with the example. Okay, so recently we needed a specific resource, like probably just a fractional resource. I think you were in on that conversation where we were talking about getting a DevOps person to specifically assist us with QA and content type tasks, sort of leaning in the marketing department, which is kind of strange to begin with because a DevOps person, you wouldn't think that you would require someone like that in the marketing department, but now here we are because content is king, right? And accurate content is king because of what AI is doing now. So I think it's the first time ever that I went onto a site called Freelancer. I think it's called Freelancer. And what they had done was actually super clever because I'm quite familiar with these systems. So to catch someone like me off guard is quite a feat, I say that in a humble way. Okay, I'm just trying to lay the groundwork of how impressed I am. Okay,
with yourself or with Freelancer?
No, with how brilliant the user experience of their system is.
Yeah.
Because had I landed, and here's the crux of what I'm trying to get through, had I landed on a big form to fill out the freelancer that I'm looking for, because I want a person in a fractional capacity for this specific task or project, I wasn't there yet. I was exploring, so I wasn't going to fill out a form and post a job. But little did I know what they were doing was, as I was signing up, they kind of they started introducing question for question into my sign-up process. But what they were doing in the background was they were building a listing for freelancers. So, and before, yes, of course, there's a point at which you realize it, but then you're kind of halfway already and you're curious as to what the next question is going to be. And as it poses itself, and you're not even aware of the fact that this has now already taken 7 or 8 minutes of your time, and you were by no means going to engage anything because you've got a laundry list of things that you've got to do, and you were just going to explore what Freelancer is about and who's over there. But what they did was they already started pulling all this information out of me, and they were building a little listing. And by the time I had hit done, they had already published the listing, and people were already starting to respond on the listing and sending me the information. And I was like, whoa, that to me is brilliant user experience, because it ticks boxes like the fact that we don't have time. Okay. They completely circumvented, like a really clever salesman that asks you the type of questions that sort of takes you aback a little bit, and you're answering without even realize that you're being pulled into, I don't know, sales acquisition or whatever, and you weren't kind of ready for it. So it's like, because you might have just responded, well, I don't have time for this right now. But little did you know, you were just kind of being reeled in like a fish. So that's what they did. Like, I don't have time. I didn't even factor that into the equation while I was going through these little steps. Everyone online has some sort of attention deficit disorder, because, I mean, even the way that we work lately, I've got 3 screens open here in front of me. Like, there's something going on there. There's something going on. Just having the attention to now focus and have this conversation with you is quite It's impressive.
Yeah.
The fact that they engaged me, and it's kind of just question for question, that whole rule, I think this is a UX rule as well, about always only have one focal point on the screen at a time, instead of this, like I said in the beginning, this big form. I would have looked at that and said, yes, okay, I'll get back to this. I understand now what you want from me. I will get back to this when I have time. So the time thing, the attention thing, and I suppose just the ease of use, I guess the ticking the first two boxes, maybe it automatically ticks the third box. It was easy to use because it's kind of just one little thing at a time, and they reel you in one step at a time. That's what I think is brilliant user experience. Yeah.
So I've always thought of user experience primarily, if I had to really dumb it down, as kind of the ease of use question, right? I've always been like, okay, user experiences, I land here and I want to have access to the things I want to have access to, and I don't want any complex menus or anything getting in my way of getting the job done. But sort of what you're saying is, yes, that's true, but these days there's more sort of psychological things to take into consideration when it comes to UX, because I can give you all the buttons you need access to and everything, but because of how busy you are and how clouded your mind is, you're going to be like, okay, I've got access, I'll come back to you later. And now you as a UX designer have to actually take that into consideration and say, well, how do I draw you in? Never mind just giving you access now. It's now a thing of, I've got to suck you into the system to some extent. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, no, 100%. So I guess in a nutshell, what you're saying, which is totally accurate, is it's almost as though, is my system intuitive and easy to use, is now this foundational thing that just has to be that way. You don't even get to ask yourself that question as a qualifying criteria anymore. It's a given. It needs to just be a given. It's easy to use and it's intuitive. What is it that you're competing for? Attention. Like marketing, you're competing for attention because everyone's being bombarded every single minute of the day with their attention. I mean, isn't that what social media is doing at the moment? They're competing for your attention. Sometimes in quite a bit of a unethical way, I could say, in terms of society principles. Like, that's a completely different conversation that we could get into, is that, like a kid's attention is being robbed from his schoolwork and homework. A father's attention is being robbed from his family and children. It's super philosophical. But I think that's what it comes down to as well, is that your user interface is also competing for attention with a whole lot of other things that's going on in this digital world for this specific user. So yes, you're exactly right. It becomes a bit of a psychological thing as well,
Now, obviously, as a software developer, you get clients to come in and say, we want all sorts of applications and stuff. And I know you guys do quite a bit of work in sort of the industrial sector. How have you found that you have the same troubles in the industrial sector? So you get given a task, you've got to build an app for engineers to access a certain thing. Do you find you have this same thought in the back of your mind the whole time, that this engineer, as much as he's at work and it's his job to go on the app and log something, you've still got to consider all of this because he's getting distracted away from it the whole time? Or how does this plug into, for instance, the industrial sector?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question, and there's some interesting answers to that can go in a whole lot of different directions. Because at first you would think, which is something that a philosophy that I also lived by, or rather did business by for a long time, that if, and I still to a degree think this way, if I am building business to consumer, then I've got to be very attentive to those sorts of things. Whereas if I'm building business to business, maybe not so much, at least not for the minimum viable product. When it comes to the minimum viable product, I've just got to get the solution to work, because the company that is is purchasing this solution to be built and is then going to distribute it to their staff members within the organization to use, doesn't really give the staff member that much of a choice. This is now what we're going to use going forward. This is the tool, and this is how you're going to use it. EpicDev is going to build the solution. We can go with them on the journey as they conceptualize, and we can review the concepts, and then they can build it, and then we can QA it together, and then they're going to train you, and then you're going to use it. Okay, you don't have that kind of luxury when it's B2C, right? Business to consumer, because then your overhanging question, or the sort of threatening reality, is, are the consumers going to adopt the solution? They vote with their money or they vote with their time in that case. And if your solution is kind of crappy compared to the next one, then no, they're not going to adopt it. They're not going to use it. However, it does become interesting in the business to business market as well, in that there are a lot of what we call SaaS solutions, software as a service. There are a lot of software as a service type solutions out there that people can choose to use within the organization. So if you miss the mark and the staff members don't really like using the product that you just built as much as maybe 3 or 4 other products that are on the market, then someone, even sometimes from the ground up, is going to motivate migrating over to another solution. And then maybe you got the gig to build the application, but I mean, that's just a once-off, right? What you're trying to do over here is you're trying to establish a good relationship that's going to bring annuity, interest, and inflow in a monetary sense into your organization, because it is constantly adding value to the organization you built it for. Well, you're going to cut yourself short if you're then not focusing a lot on the user experience of the staff members there, because at some point, someone, whether it's one of the other higher ups or someone from the ground floor up, is going to motivate going with another solution there. And there you go. You've now actually lost the relationship.
So you talk about sort of the heightened importance of this in a B2C environment, business to customer, business to client. Now, I'm wondering to myself, how often do you come across a potential B2C customer who doesn't seem to understand the value of this UX thing as well as you do? So what I'm imagining is, you actually, in a B2C environment, UX is super high up on your priorities list for your minimum viable product. But as a business owner, I'm thinking data accumulation or whatever else it might be, and I'm thinking, I want to have this database of emails, and I want to have this thing, and I want to have that thing. And how often do you have to give it a little bit of pushback and be like, hang on, we need to really just make sure the UX is on point,
Yeah, all the time. The business owner that's purchasing this solution that is for the B2C market is going to have those goals, like you said, data accumulation, or use our app, which then integrates with our services and our products and brings you into our ecosystem, which then benefits the company. Or maybe it's a service that they're selling. That's the underlying thing that they're going to be focusing on, which is fine, because that is that person's role. Like for example, in the Scrum methodology, we call that the product owner. And that's the product owner's role. That's fine. It is up to us then, let's still use that Scrum analogy. It's then up to the UX designer and or developer to then explain, okay, that's fine. That is the goal. That's what we need to achieve. But now I'm going to explain to you how we're going to achieve that. And we've got to do that often. And the ironic thing, though, is that you've got to really explain and motivate that in the beginning. And it might feel as though people aren't really focusing on that much and maybe taking it for granted. But it definitely doesn't feel like that once you actually put the finished solution in the product owner's hands and he's driving it for the first time. Because now suddenly UX is also the highest priority on his radar, So you've got to kind of make sure that you're motivated right from the start to say this is what's going to happen. And you can even use that example of, by the time you're going to use this thing, you're going to agree with me, trust me, that user experience is number one. In fact, I think that one of the reasons why Apple started doing so well when they came out with the iPhone and the iPad, don't quote me on this, let's just say rumor has it, okay, that Steve Jobs would tell the engineers the exact user experience that the market is looking for. The engineers would argue against it, saying, okay, but that with the current technology available is not possible. And he would say, okay, yes, but this is what we're going to achieve, and you're going to go figure out how to achieve that. So user experience, because if you think about it, even price point for him, and I suppose that kind of, in a bigger sense, forms part of the user experience. Okay, especially when you're purchasing something like an iPad, because it's the experience of me going to they even talk about unboxing experiences these days,
Yeah.
Like when I was a kid, that wasn't even a thing. Just rip the thing open and start using it. Like now, suddenly unboxing is like an experience in its own. So they like the whole, like standing in the queue, purchasing what you're paying, then getting the box, unboxing it, and then start using the thing. That whole experience was thought of first, and then it was engineered, and it was the engineering team's mandate was not just to engineer the solution, but to find out how to engineer it to get to this level of user experience that it is that we want ultimately. And that's why it rocked the world.
Yeah. Because
the experience for the user was second to none. Nothing else like that was available at the time that had come to the market up until that point. That was such a joy to use and experience.
It's an incredible thing to think about, the power of the user experience, and in that context, as you're discussing, like it can literally make or break a product, and it's just got me thinking, like, I suppose there's sort of two elements that are very often undervalued in the initial proposal from a business owner to EpicDev or any software development company. The first is user experience, and the second is possibly, what would you call it, sort of customer service, long-term customer service, that's sort of, after sales, what happens after I've used your app. Because I'm almost thinking the average user has absolutely no care or bother about the back end of your app and how it's storing data and how it's recording trends or anything. They just want to use the thing, buy the product or book the service or whatever it is, and they want to be on their way. And the only other time they're going to log in here is if they want to buy again, book again, or if they have a problem.
Mm-hmm.
For you as the business owner, this thing is your life. This thing is, you're looking at it every day, and it's building trend graphs for you, and it's accumulating data for you. But for your customer, it's like I stop here, I get my thing, and I go. Not necessarily, I mean, some apps draw you in for long periods of time, but the thing is, I come for the experience, and that's all I come for. And the only other time I'm going to click on this app or open this website is if I've got a problem. I suppose your job very often is like trying to show your customers how valuable those two sort of channels are.
And not only that, also trying to get them to understand that you're competing globally. Once again, especially in the B2C market, I think the users and the business owner that's about to purchase the developments of this application they take for granted the fact that the user's been spoiled, because right next to this app of yours that you want them to install now, right next to that on the little phone's dashboard is an app that was developed by Google. And the user doesn't draw a distinction between the two. This is an app that I'm going to use, and this is an app that I'm going to use. And if he opens up the app that was developed by Google, the experience is amazing. And then he opens your app. He's not going to, I might say, or the business owner might say, yes, okay, but let's be realistic about this. We didn't have as much budget. We didn't have as big teams to do the testing, QA before launch, or the group testing, or the, tag on all your things over here in a long laundry list. The user doesn't care. They're literally just judging the two right next to each other, going, well, this app sucks, and this app is cool, and I'm going to use this app. And I don't know so much about this one. I'm going to uninstall it because it's clunky, or I don't know. It's maybe even not clunky necessarily. You don't have to put it down that much, but just understand the fact that you're on this world stage. Now, fortunately for us, there are a lot of technologies that have come a long way, like coding libraries, and Google has made material design open source, and like they've done with a whole lot of other things, like their icons and their fonts and material design itself. It's this library of widgets and buttons and things that have just come to become expected by the user in an application. So we can utilize all of these things and then make sure that our app is going to be right up there, a similar type of standard as the one that's next to it, that was developed by a tech giant in Silicon Valley. So you just need to make sure that you then you're aware of all of these tools at your disposal and know how to implement them the right way, and you'll be fine. I think the point is just don't take that kind of stuff for granted,
With regards to user experience, one of the things I've often wondered about, because I think I've read some obscure stories in history about how developers have made certain decisions regarding user experience that have seemed somewhat counterintuitive at first glance. It's like we've nested away a menu somewhere, or we've done something, we've actually made something more difficult to find, but it improves the user experience, or whatever it might be. Can you think of like something that you've had to defend in terms of these kinds of decisions that is perhaps considered somewhat common practice, or even just something that's unique to a project you can think of, where you've had to say, listen, trust me, this is the best decision for your user experience, even though it might seem counterintuitive? Because I imagine as a business owner and as a developer who's got expertise in user experience, the expectation of what makes a good user experience is totally different.
Yeah, it can sometimes be a bit off the mark. So I think we come across these sorts of things very often. I can't really think of too many examples right now, other than the fact that I guess the example that I used earlier on of instead of filling out a long form, let's say there's 10 fields in this form, presenting it to the user field for field, or 1 or 2 fields at a time or something. And then you've got these like 6 or 7 steps that you've got to go through instead of just filling in this one form. I think in the beginning that was a controversial recommendation. You would be like, no, but I don't understand. Why do you want me to go through 7 steps like this instead of just seeing the form and filling the form out? I can imagine a business owner specifically, or a product owner, being like, okay, well, I don't know, this doesn't make any sense to me. Yet here we go. It is actually the best method, and I think it's been proven to be such, which again is the whole idea. And I think there's a book here that I read, this guy, awesome book. I don't have any affiliation with this book, so I'm not plugging you or anything, but I would recommend anyone in this industry, and even if you're interested in developing a tech product, to read that book, because what they try and drive home is let the data make your decisions, meaning let the feedback from the actual users guide you to where it is that you should go. So let's take that example as the form that you split into 7 steps instead of just having one form. Maybe you feel emotionally that doesn't make sense to you, and then you kick back against it. But they've tried it in the past, and the engagement and follow through in the data that they've monitored has proven that it's way more successful of an approach to get people to fill out a form, as opposed to just slapping one big form with all the fields right in front of the user.
I think one of the values of having this conversation and talking in this direction is hopefully there's business owners who will watch this podcast and they will see, they'll learn and come into their meetings with their software developers or EpicDev, hopefully, just more informed, right? Because being informed just makes everything so much better. And so I suppose that's kind of why I ask these questions a little bit, because I'm saying, hey, how can we help the potential business owner who's watching come to you and make the phone call, but be more informed when they're engaging in that conversation? So
yeah, I think it's just also a discussion on like let's get back to the fundamentals of it, is what works and what doesn't work, and sometimes you need to have wrestled with something for a really long time to understand the intricacies of why this works and why this doesn't work.
On that note, for interest's sake, what kind of process do you guys have internally at EpicDev to sort of pre-test the user experience? So I'm sure you guys have like what you call the QA process and stuff. I've heard you talk about these fancy things, but obviously you guys are software developers, and so your immediate disposition in a sort of natural sense is very much like the business owner is going to say, oh, we don't have the resources to do this, or we don't have the capacity to do this. But when you're involved in testing this user experience, you've got to push that out of your brain, and you've got to be like, it doesn't matter what resources we have and how much budget we've had and how much time we've had. This user experience has to be top class. I don't know if there's like a process that helps you with that before you send it out to your customer. Maybe we want to talk about that a little bit.
Before I send the customer the proposal, or do you mean before
the customer gets his first
100%
hands-on experience of the
100%. So first of all, what we found works really well is if you break the project into milestones. Okay, so there's so many analogies that I've heard over the years, like 1,000 steps start with, or 1,000 miles journey starts with one step. Or how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time? Or it's and it would be helpful if people do always view these projects as giant undertakings, because they are. So break it up into little milestones, little sprints, whatever you want to call it. What we actually use, we use milestones, defined milestones, and sometimes within milestones, because certain milestones can be quite long and daunting themselves, we'll break it into sprints. So sprint 1 of milestone 4, which is usually the back-end development. We like breaking the back-end development into at least 3 sprints, for example. And also on top of that, take into account the fact that sometimes a product build like this could also be phased. So you generally want to start with MVP, minimum viable product. So minimum viable product is essentially your first phase, which gets broken up into your milestones, and sometimes your milestones into your sprints. Okay, that sounds very complicated, but trust me, that's the best way to take these sorts of things on. And then to answer your question a little bit more directly, what is amazing, sort of like a recent thing that's come into our industry, is Figma and the ability to easily create prototypes with Figma. So in order to conceptualize, like design that entire application with all its screens, let's say it's a mobile application, so you've got little mobile portrait screens, and you design all your steps and you link your little elements, and you're able to send the client a link, and they can actually browse through the application and get a real feel and view of what this thing would look like before you've touched any code. That's just been a dream come true for us in this industry.
That's amazing, actually. Slightly different question. I'm imagining that sometimes in aid of a better user experience, you have to modify the way a database is built or the way information is accumulated. So I'm thinking a client comes to you and says, we want to accumulate this kind of data from our customers or from a transaction or whatever it might be. And ideally, we want these data points. And then as you're working on the user experience, you're like, you know what, this specific data point you want maybe won't be as easy to gather as what you think it would be because the user experience is king. I'm not too sure if there's a conversation to be had there about that interaction between the database and the user experience, specifically how these two things interact.
User experience definitely can make that a lot more complicated. That's something that I can say on that topic. I'm not sure if that's your exact question, but
yeah.
If you're going to accept the fact that user experience is going to drive the project, as I believe it should, you're also actually at the same time accepting the fact that it's, in most cases, I would say, makes the development more difficult. If you think about it, even just that example of the form, that's the reason why you're probably 90% of the time still just being met with forms, because it's easier. It's a whole lot easier to develop because you've got one form tag and you're putting all your fields. I mean, HTML was meant to be constructed this way. That's why you've got a form tag and an input field, and a selection field, and a text area field, all being wrapped into a form tag with all of its little post and submit and et cetera, That's fairly simple. And even when we were trained, I'm not sure about universities and colleges these days, but I'm quite sure they probably would still be training the engineers to build forms that way. So this whole idea, now suddenly a user experience guy comes along and says, no, we're going to completely break the mold on that. Let me tell you how we're going to do it. The engineer kind of sits in the corner going, what are you smoking? That's not the way that you do these things. So it definitely overcomplicates things, In terms of the data, though, I would argue that user experience has to drive it. Engineering needs to then, like previously said, Steve Jobs told his engineers to go figure out how to do that. So that's engineering's job. And then it comes together again at the data point, just basically being the payload is what the client wants and what the client needs, and that shouldn't be negotiable. That what the payload at the end of the day needs to be, you shouldn't negotiate on that. It needs to be what it needs to be. And I kind of feel like the same way about user experience. User experience, this is, we've done our studies, we've gotten the data back. This is what the users want. This is how they want to use it. So, sorry for the engineer, but it kind of comes back down to him. It's like, you just got to do what you got to do to make sure that this thing is built this way. But then again, just remember that projects are generally broken up into phases. So you don't necessarily have to go and accomplish all of that in MVP. You could, these are sort of more like things that we often look at in phase 2 or 3, where there's a form and people are filling it in. But now we're studying the analytics data from Google Analytics, and we're seeing that there's about a 40% drop-off when people arrive at the form. Okay, cool. Now we're going to embark on a project within the second phase to now start getting better engagement and less drop-off. And the answer might be to break the form up into steps, for example. Or your client has the budget, and we do have the time, and this is a B2C product, and we're competing with the best of the best. So it has to be like that from day one. Fair enough.
So it almost sounds to me like software development, in a sense. You've got two kind of immovable goalposts. What the client wants in terms of their database and their outcomes, and the user experience. Are like almost two immovable goalposts, which then engineering and everybody else has to figure out how to link these two things together.
Yes, so I would just, in a simplified sense, in a perfect world, I think it is like that. Yes, and I think that's the the goal that you should be pursuing every single time? Yes. That UX should be king, and payload that the client wants shouldn't be negotiable. Everything in between needs to work super hard to make it a reality.
That's very cool. Very cool. Very difficult as well.
The common gripe from the software developer is that they don't sleep. And now you understand why.
Yeah. For sure.
But then take into account now that there's a little savior on the scene now at the moment for the software developer called AI. So
I'm sure there's some conversation to be had about AI's role in UX, but I think we're actually a bit early days in AI for it to have a real impact on how the average user experiences most apps. And
it seems to understand it. It seems to understand, and I've had quite a couple of experiences now where okay, so I use Claude, so I'm just going to say Claude, it's easier. So where Claude has suggested a flow that I go, yeah, actually 100%, that makes a lot more sense. And you can kind of feel like, because what is it at the moment? It's this machine that takes in all the data of the world and understands it and spits out a scenario at you. So it's obviously a big enough topic online that Claude has ingested this information of what user experience is and what is considered good user experience at the moment. It's not going to think creatively. Okay, so let's put Claude back in, when was Steve Jobs doing the iPhone? 2006?
I have no idea.
Right, so let's just say it's 2006. Put Claude in 2006. Claude wasn't going to suggest to Steve Jobs how the iPad needs to be. Like, that was a creative genius that came up with that because he understood the user and understood the market. Claude wasn't going to give him that information because that it didn't exist yet. It's always going to need a human to come up with what the next cutting edge thing is. And then fast forward 3 or 4 years where this has become an industry standard, now Claude's going to understand it. Okay, so I guess that's a long-winded way of explaining that I think that user experience has come along enough way for it to be prevalent enough that the AI bots have ingested that information enough to be able to give us some good guidelines when we're asking it about. It generally brings itself forward in the sense of the user flow, for example. I want this guy to sign up and he's going to need to give me this information, and then he's going to use it as this type of service, and then Claude is going to give you a flow that, I don't know, 80% of the time I go, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I suppose that whole explanation about how Claude gathers information makes absolute sense then, that it would be able to make some suggestions to you in that regard. A last question. You obviously are quite passionate about user experience, and it's obviously something that you've really spent a lot of time thinking about and enveloped in your industry. Do you think that there's a whole lot of untapped potential in the market for selling user experience? So you spoke earlier, this is what sparked my question. You spoke earlier about Steve Jobs and how they sort of were selling a user experience. But now that's been going on for years and years and years and years, and it's been tapped into by so many different industries and so many different markets. But do you still get excited at the possibilities of selling user experience? And do you think there's untapped markets in terms of selling user experience?
Yes, I definitely believe there is. I could, sort of the same game that a lot of these search engine optimization companies play, where they go do an audit on your site and they, out of nowhere, you get this email that says your site actually sucks in terms of SEO. And they play that game because they know 90% of what they're going to find over there is going to have some sort of flaw that they can fix. And I believe you could probably do exactly the same thing with user experience. If you just send me 10 random websites right now and give me about an hour, and I'll come back with a list of things that they can do. It's interesting though that it can be approached in quite a few different ways. So I would still actually take a little audit and suggestion lists like that with a pinch of salt. because I would argue that you'd need to get to know the organization and their goals a little bit better first. And you could also, there's two different scenarios that you can go now, right? You can have really good user experience in terms of the user interface and the flow, or you could say, can we actually put a bot on the site that could, instead of the user doing all these little steps in the user interface, could the bot not actually do a heck of a lot of it and save the user all that trouble? In certain cases, yes. In certain cases, no. You know, there are scenarios where bots are clever enough to do certain tasks for humans and it works out really well. But there are also an equal or maybe even more scenarios where it really irritated the user and he never wants to go back. So we kind of so we're kind of at a point where offer them both, you know. I think that's where we're at the moment, is because it's almost like this weird gray area where some people are moving over and starting to understand that AI, like, how does it work and how does it benefit you? And then if I land on your site and you have a bot there and I poke at it and it seems to have a clever response, I'll be like, okay, cool, this is a cool experience. Whereas you have your people that are like, ugh, that thing irritates me. Which, funny enough, the youth today, like, what do they call them, Gen Z? Wow, they don't like it. Eh? But they got a kind of strange relationship with AI at the moment, because they seem to enjoy it when it comes to their studies. It can like write a little essay for them and stuff, but they don't like it in the real world. Probably because, I don't know, it's going to take their jobs. So yeah, I think you got to just, you know, be careful, cater for both.
Yeah.
Make sure that your user interface for the interaction with the user, with the human, is as smooth and as awesome as it can be. And maybe start contemplating a bot, but don't take the bot for granted. Don't just slap a cheap solution in there and think that people are going to enjoy it. You might harm your organization more than anything, you know.
Well, if there's one thing I've learned by doing some research in the industry over my years, and I've always been like sort of adjacent to software development for some reason. I've always dabbled and researched and stuff. And if there's one thing I've found to be true, it's that across the board, bad user experience is the number one reason for failure. There's no doubt, there's no competing for first place here. Bad user experience is the worst possible case for your app or product or website or whatever.
Yeah, it's almost like remember back like earlier days, it was like, does your business have a website? Because if it doesn't have a website, it's not on the map. Should now be like, okay, your business, I'm going to start with your business has a website, because if it doesn't, it's not a business. The question should be, is your business user friendly? Because if not, you're not on the map.